The recent Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, which, is a huge political and economic alliance in Eurasia, was the setting for something really big. For the first time in 7 years, the leaders of India and China actually met face-to-face. And believe me, this was way more than just a handshake. It could be a major turning point for diplomacy in Asia.
But this whole diplomatic dance really boils down to one massive question. After years of tension, especially along their border, can India really trust China? That's the puzzle we're going to try and solve together in this explainer.
All right, Section 1. So what was the actual vibe of the meeting? Well, this was no routine photo op. After a 7-year diplomatic ice age, this summit feels like a cautious but very, very deliberate thaw.
And this, right here, this is the headline. Development partners, not rivals. This little phrase was the official new mantra that both leaders agreed on. It's a super carefully chosen line, meant to publicly hit the reset button to change the whole story from competition to cooperation. That's a huge shift in language.
So you might be wondering, okay, but is this just talk? Well, not entirely. To back up that new slogan, both sides made a point of acknowledging the fragile peace that's holding in eastern Ladakh. They promised to use the systems they already have to keep the border calm. But the biggest deal here? They're talking again. The diplomatic channels that went completely cold are finally being switched back on.
So that brings us to the million-dollar question. Why now? What on earth pushed these two giants back to the negotiating table after all this time? Turns out, this wasn't just about them. There were some major outside forces at play.
And a huge piece of this puzzle comes down to this number, 50%. That's how high some new U.S. tariffs on Indian goods have climbed, partly because of pressure over India buying Russian oil. When you're facing that kind of economic squeeze from the West, it kind of forces your hand, right? You've got to start looking around for other powerful partners.
So you can see India was basically standing at a fork in the road. On one side, you have growing economic friction with the U.S. On the other side, you've got China saying, hey, forget all that. Come join us in building a world with multiple power centers. We've even got our own development bank to help out. So for India, this meeting was just a smart, practical move in a world where the chess pieces are moving fast.
Let's get into the nitty-gritty. Beyond all the grand statements, what was actually agreed upon? And, just as important, where did India draw a line in the sand and say, nope, not happening? So if you look at the final scorecard, it was definitely a mixed bag. There were some clear wins on things like connectivity and culture, people-to-people stuff, some progress on counterterrorism. But India drew a hard red line on a joint defense deal. So yeah, they made some practical progress, but they also agreed to disagree. And the wins were really down to earth, focused on reconnecting people. We're talking about resuming direct flights, restarting the really important Kailash Mansarovar pilgrimage, making it easier to get visas, and planning cultural exchanges. These are all concrete, tangible steps designed to start mending fences from the ground up.
But, and this is a really big but, this is where India put its foot down. It flat out refused to sign the Joint Defense Statement. And why? Because the language on terrorism just wasn't strong enough. This is a crucial moment because it really shows India's independent streak. It's basically saying, look, we're happy to talk, we're happy to cooperate, but we will not compromise on our core security.
Okay, so given this really complex mix of cooperation and caution, what's India's game plan moving forward? Well, this summit actually gives us a sneak peek into a new playbook for how India plans to handle China while still carving out its own path.
And that playbook really has 4 key points. First, keep talking. Use these big international groups like the SCO to manage tensions. Second, stay on top of the border situation. Keep the diplomats engaged so things don't blow up. Third, and this one is huge, don't put all your economic eggs in one basket. And fourth, strengthen your other teams, your alliances with partners like ASEAN and the Quad to keep the region balanced. It's a smart, multi-layered approach to a very complex problem.
So let's bring it all home and look at the final scorecard. Look, nobody walked away from this summit best friends forever. That was never going to happen. It was something much more realistic, much more pragmatic.
So if you tally it all up, on trust building, they set a new, more positive tone. On trade and economics, they reopened some really important practical links. On security, they found some common ground, but India also stood its ground. And the overall strategy, it's a clear move towards smart, practical balancing in a world of shifting power.
Which takes us all the way back to that first big question. Can India trust China? And the verdict from this summit seems pretty clear. This isn't about blind trust. It's about the revival of smart, pragmatic diplomacy, driven by what each country needs right now. It's a necessary re-engagement, not a declaration of undying friendship. And so, I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. Are we watching the beginning of a genuinely new chapter for Asia? One built on careful, calculated cooperation? Or is this all just a strategic timeout, a brief pause in a long-term rivalry that's pretty much inevitable?